Oh, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Carl Garth, and welcome to our latest edition of the Champion Chat with Councillor Alison Champion. And today we also have a special guest in author Maureen Jones. Good afternoon, Alison and Maureen. How are you both today?
Good. Thank you, Carl. Looking forward to the chat.
Wonderful. Alison?
Happy to be here. I'm happy to be here as usual, Carl. Thank you for asking, and I'm also looking forward to this chat.
Well, absolutely. And in this week's edition of the Champion Chat, we will be taking a look at the rich culture and heritage of Banyule City. Alison, I'm sure both you and Maureen would agree, Banyule is very lucky to have so much of our history documented.
I agree. This has been, to see this book come out. So this book first came out in 2015.
Sorry, and this book is called?
Montmorency, Farm on the Plenty. There we go. That's my edition. So that's my edition of Montmorency, Farm on the Plenty. And we'll obviously find out a little bit more about how Maureen came to create it. But I bought this several copies many years ago, and I've read it a couple of times now. And having been elected, just being elected since 2016, I've come to become closer to my community, to the area, and just through this time I've come to understand the area a lot more through the people and through documentation. And this is one of the important documents that has been created to allow for that connection. So I've learned a lot more through Maureen's work in the book. So I would love everybody else in the community to know about it as well.
Thank you, Alison. Yes.
And Maureen, actually, could you just give us a little bit of a background of how you got into writing, and and a little bit about your background in the community?
Carl, I've been writing for years. In my previous work as a social worker, we always had to keep case notes. So writing was just part of the work. When Adrian and I were down in the country in South Gippsland, I was asked to write a history. No, I wasn't asked. The local church wanted a history of the church in the area, and they were looking for someone to write. And I said, well, I think I can do it. And so in the year 2000, I wrote the history of the church in South Gippsland. That's the Catholic church, which covered from Port Albert to Foster, Fish Creek, and Tura, a lovely part of the world. So that was quite a success, which was good. And then I was part of the Bird Observers group, and they kept asking me to write articles to send into the Bird Observers magazine. So I did that. So I started my writing down there. I then had a lot of material from our family history that I thought was very interesting. So in 2008, I wrote a book about Mary Morgan, who was a convict woman who was sent from London to Tasmania in 1834. She had 8 children with her and had her last baby on the ship. And I thought that was a pretty amazing story. So that was published, and that was published just after we came back to live here. Then a couple of years later, I was asked to be part of writing a book about a woman squatter in Broadford. And that was written to a timetable because they wanted to celebrate 200 years since she'd been born in Ireland. So that was on the go. But meanwhile, after I came back, I started to look for a history of Montmorency and could find nothing. The local library had a couple of sheets of paper in a manila folder. The state library in the city had a few cards in the old card indexes. And I began to wonder why Montmorency didn't have a history. So over time, I'd just pick up bits and pieces and think about it, but did nothing. So after I'd written the book on Emily Gavin, the squatter in in Broadford, I thought I'd really concentrate on Montmorency, and I had to go to the Lands Department to look at the original documents. And all of a sudden it became obvious why we haven't had a history. And the land had stayed in the one family from 1840 to 1910, and there'd been no changes except for the Shire of Eltham putting a road through. And there were some letters from the owner at that time complaining about the Shire, which is, you know, nothing new under the sun, is there? And so the story then took on a different twist, because it became the story of a woman who had been born in India and been educated in England and brought to, and had come to Sydney, and she inherited the Montmorency land. And in her will, she said it wasn't to be sold until it would bring a certain price per acre. Now, that didn't happen until 1910, and she'd been dead for 20 years. And finally, the land was opened up. Now, in that time, Eltham and Greensborough had both developed into small farmlets and then to small building blocks, whereas Montmorency had stayed exactly the same. And I really think we owe a lot to Eliza Donathorne for putting her foot down and saying no one is going to touch my land, and the Eltham Shire can go away or they can compensate me. And she stood up to them. They even sent someone to Sydney to see her, and she refused to see them. This was in about 1880. So I think we have a lot to thank Eliza for Montmorency. We've able to retain the vegetation, the roads confuse everyone, which is wonderful. And not so much now with GPS, but for the first few years, people would get lost in Montmorency. But, so Ron and I came to live in Monty in 1960, bought our first block of land. And then the high school was built at, down in Sims Road where we were. So we went to live in Lower Plenty, and then we bought this block of land here in Annanson Court. And on and off, I've been here ever since.
Okay.
So that's the story. Once I found out about Eliza, I thought this story has got to be told, because it made a big difference to Montmorency. Montmorency is what it is, I think, because of Eliza Donathorne. Now, her father is remembered in Kyneton because he had the St Agnes run, and they have a Donathorne Street, I think. But we don't have anything here, Alison. We don't have anything to recognise Eliza, and I think she's really important.
Okay.
And it's you know, it's really interesting to hear you talk about this. You know, the book Montmorency, the Farm on the Plenty. I know, Alison, you've talked about it quite a bit. I know it's a passion of yours.
Yeah.
Being in the local community, maybe you've got some questions you'd like to ask of Maureen about the author process.
I would actually. I'm hearing about your actions and your activities that you did, Maureen, but also other parts of research. Surely, as you got into the research of this, did people sort of come out of the woodwork and start saying, "Oh, Maureen, I know this person," or "My family was this," or "Here, I've got a map of this"?
Yes.
And is that so? Can you sort of let us know a bit about that?
The Eltham Historical Society had just a few pieces written, which was great. Greensborough hadn't started when Greensborough Historical Society hadn't started. Heidelberg, of course, they had a little bit. But it's interesting, over the years, we've had little newspapers, or we've had people have written articles that have appeared in the newspapers that, with a lot of sleuthing, you can get onto. And there's even a reference in I can't remember the name of the story, but it was a travel book about going up the Hume Highway, and they talk about Montmorency, and you think, oh, that's really obscure. But that took a long time to find all those bits and pieces. So from probably, if I started in 2007, it would have been to 2014 before I had enough. But then people started to come up with stories, and I'd say, well, you know, tell me about that. And they would give me some references, and photographs were fantastic. People would just keep sending me different photographs, and you could create a story around a photograph. And there's one with, I think in the 50s, where there's a class from Monty, and that generated so much interest. People contacted me and said, I know who that is, and there I am there, and I'd forgotten all about those. So it was I suppose the first part of the book was the historical research, and then maybe the second part or the third part, I think, it became a community project. And then after it was printed, I could have written another book, but because of all the people who wanted to tell me different stories, but I was exhausted by then, and I thought, oh, I can't do this anymore. So I think where I leave it is good. I'm happy leaving it where I did, because contemporaries can now create their own story. They'll have their own story. Sadly, some of the people who put articles in the book have passed on, so that's good. And I'm really pleased that their names have been captured in the book, and they won't be forgotten.
No. And talking about not being forgotten, and going back to the start of the book and the start of the area, you actually go back to the Indigenous period. So what assistance did you have for that information? What research did you do for that period of time in the area?
I went to Banyule Council and asked them what they had done, and I think fairly recently to the early research, they had put out a document. So I used what they had done. I'm no expert on looking at the Indigenous history, but I relied on what Banyule had given me, and the same with the vegetation. That was all based on what Banyule had put out.
Okay.
And I think it was fortunate that I'd gone to Banyule to look at a grants program to look at something for, I think, the Eltham Historical Society. We didn't qualify, and I can't remember her name, but one of the officers said, well, there's this program. And I said, oh, I might qualify for some help with that. And so she asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, at that stage I'd finished all the writing, was putting it together, and was ready to go to print. And she said, oh, we might be able to help you with some costs for the printing. So that was fantastic, because that wasn't expected, and it came out of the blue, and I qualified, and that was good.
Grant,
so Banyule had quite a hand in it.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear. So that was obviously one of the little surprises that you found in the process, and a pleasant surprise. What are some other surprises that you found out, not only about your experience, but also the suburb itself, Montmorency, that makes you proud of the whole thing?
I don't know, listen. There might be a big gap here.
That's right. We can come back to that. There is something, I mean, I can answer that for myself.
I suppose one of the surprises was people were so enthusiastic about it. When you do a book like that, you think, oh, I hope I've got it right. And I hope people will find it as interesting as I have found it. You think, oh, are you just so caught up in it that you don't really, you're not objective enough? But then I think when Jenny Macklin launched it, she said she had read it, and she had a lot of little post-it pieces of paper in it, and she was holding it in her hand when she was launching it. And she said, Maureen has been meticulous. And I thought, I don't think anyone has ever used the word meticulous of that. Yeah, I probably have been meticulous. So I guess that was one of the surprises, that other people found it as interesting and were as enthusiastic about it as I was. The cover, I used one of our local photographers to do some photography around the place, and I chose a few. And then I have a very talented son, and he created the cover. And I just think it's, every time I look at it, I love it. I still love it, even though I've seen it for 6 years now. I think it's really Monty, and I know,
that's a testament.
I think one of the things that, from what I'm hearing, that you should be proud of, Maureen, is that you've brought a story to life, and a community has actually embraced that story, and to the point where you're now doing a second reprint because there has been that much interest. It's very easy sometimes to find information on big history, but then when we talk about communities, and communities really are tight, so the fact that you've then brought something to life of a community, they've embraced it to, obviously a very high level. I think that's something that you could be proud of, that you've put this community, this current community, in touch with its past.
That's right. Which there was no way of doing it before. I mean, in Pioneers and Painters, I think there's a couple of pages, but there's nothing about the early part, which I think is the defining part of Montmorency. I think we are what we are because of that. Even the Weir Street running to the station, it goes no further, and it sort of captures, we're captured by this Weir Street little shopping strip, which is extraordinary. I think one of the reasons I decided to reprint was, I think people are feeling a bit sad of what's happening in Monty with the railway going through, and all we can see is an industrial site, and it's just like things that have been nurtured along the way. I heard some older men talking about how they'd looked after the trees between Montmorency and Greensborough Station, and as soon as the railway came, everything's wiped out, and it's just in the, overnight it can happen, whereas looking after the trees, they were probably doing that for decades maybe. There's some lovely information about a family who was here in the 1920s, that's the very beginning, who had a meadow party, which is like a garden party, but it was on a block of land in Mountain View Road, with covered in wildflowers. And I just think it must have been such a lovely place to come to. And 2,000 people would come to the railway and walk down to along the river there for picnics and things like that. And you think it must have been a fantastic place to come and be that close to the bush. And maybe people from Heidelberg came out here because it was just a bit more countrified. Or they'd go to Eltham and have their get their hot water and have their picnics there. But Monty said part of it too. Once we got our station. Now, Alison, I think we're going to be 100 in a couple of years' time.
I've already had a chat with our CEO, Alison Beckwith, about that. I've just said, Alison, the Montmorency train station is 100 years old. I think it's the 5th of November, 2023.
I'd have to look at the book.
Yeah, that's all right. I did read it. As soon as I read it, I went, I'll just email this to Alison and let her know, because I want there to be a party.
That'd be fantastic. I have a project in mind. I'm hoping I could do that.
Oh, yeah. we'll talk. Oh, well, that's all right. But coming back to your comments, when I've reread the book, obviously, yes. and I was just visualising. I read the book the first time before I was in council. Right. And I read it for the second time very recently, obviously, coming back off my first term as the former mayor of the council, and in a different headspace. And right. So I was really, as you were saying, I was really visualising how these blocks or these areas that we talk about, the streets, may have looked 80 years ago, 100 years ago, etc., when people were coming out here. It's only from Ivanhoe. For us, it's a 15-minute drive down the road. But for them back then, it was almost a day trip. It was right. A day trip, yeah. And so I was just trying to visualise, okay, what was it for them? Which road did they come on? It was probably unsealed. They would have stopped off anywhere they wanted and put down their rug and their picnic basket, and there just would have been hills, trees, grassland for miles.
That's right. Beautiful. And lots of fruit tree. They talk about the spring, a lot of blossom. Yeah. You could see on the train in the spring because of all the fruit trees that have been planted, because it was promoted as an orchard area, but no, it really was more of a chook area, a poultry farms. Yeah. So I hear you, and there were lots of visions created and to get an idea of the past. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that certainly comes up in the book. Yeah. So now with for you as an author, you have sort of touched on this a little bit. What were some challenges that you came across throughout the whole process, whether it was through a grant with council, through getting the information you needed, connecting with people? What were some challenges that you experienced and really were determined to overcome during this whole process? One of the big challenges was that Eliza Donnithorne, who's the one that I guess influenced me to actually write it and get the story down, she had a bit of a history in Sydney as a bit of a strange recluse. And there's a lot of misinformation about her on the web, which I gathered and looked at and thought, well, I don't like the sound of that. I'm not sure about that. So I went to a lot of trouble to track down family in London, and that was well, it was interesting. You had to be really careful about what you were gathering and what you were going to write about her. And so in the end, I declined to write all what I thought was rubbish about her, and wrote what I just could prove and what the family told me. So that was a bit of a challenge to choose what to put in and what not to put in. One of the other things I had to do was, having found about James Donnithorne, who originally bought the land, he'd been in India and in quite a high position. So I found this photograph with on the, I think it's the British Museum. No, not sure about that. Anyway, I had to pay $90 to use the photograph, and you look and you think, is this going to be worth $90? And then you think, oh, no headaches, just pay your $90 and you can use it. So they were the sort of things you think, am I just, at that stage I didn't know whether I would publish or not. So you're thinking, is this just a whim of mine? Should I pay $90? And in the long run, of course, it's well worth paying $90 because you've done the right thing. You've put money back into museums or libraries. I think it was the British Library. I have to read the book. And so you're making choices about what you'll spend, what you won't spend, how far you'll go down this rabbit hole, leave it alone. And then you find nice little bits and you think, oh, I can't really fit that in. That doesn't fit in, but it's a nice story. So, yeah, you're making those decisions all the time, what to do. And
yeah, okay. And from what I'm hearing from you there is kind of the value for money angle. And so I'm hearing you invested $90, and then really how many books did you end up selling after that with that piece of information that was important for the stories?
Well, I think it was important, so it makes up for the whole business. I mean, $90 is not much compared to everything else, but at the time you think, is it? Oh no, that's a good picture. That's a very unusual picture. It's I suppose there were a lot of people who came from India in the 1830s, and you see it cross-referenced every now and again. You think, oh yes, that's the time when James Donathorne came here. He didn't go back to England when things changed there. He came here, and I think because there'd been a lot of trade in between India and Sydney, you know, it was not. It didn't seem that strange for them to come to Sydney, but I would have loved to have met Eliza. Growing up born in South Africa, growing up in India, educated in England, and then out here, rushing out to save her inheritance from the new woman in her father's life. Nothing changes.
No, and what an amazing thought, a whole lot of cultures being a part of.
That's right.
Isn't that amazing?
Right. Yeah.
That's worldly.
Here we are sitting in Montmorency because of that woman's decision making about, no, you're not going to sell this until it brings a certain amount of money.
Yeah, you know what? You're not selling this until I decide, and it's over my dead body.
That's right.
Literally.
That's it.
Yeah, literally. Very, very strong character. Yeah, perfect. So you mentioned a few things you've learned along the way with writing the book originally. With second edition going to print, with those learnings, what's made that easier going to print a second time?
The thing for this one that's made it easier was I had no complaints except for one word, and I'd called. I should have known because I've been involved with Scouts for so much. I called one of the groups of Scouts by the wrong name, and someone picked me up, and I thought, oh, but no one else has ever complained. So I'm presuming either they're not going to complain, or everyone's happy with it. And I thought, if it's not broken, why change it? Just leave it. And I'm happy where I left it, because I think it's up to this generation now to say, what do we want for Montmorency? And you know what they don't want? They just don't want it to be turned into an industrial site, which we'll have to live with for a while. But yeah, I'm happy. I think I've learned that, you know, it's all right. You can do it again. I have reprinted another book that I did. Made a few changes, not many, but I made a few changes. But this one people seem to have loved it, so why change it?
Yeah. Now, there's always a team behind a person for every success, always, no matter what industry or what action we take or what how people see us, there is always a group of people who are around you or behind you to create that success. So are there, who in particular springs to mind for you who has helped you learn, grow in this experience and create this beautiful piece of writing?
Okay, there, Alison. Adrian proofread everything. Chris did the artwork. local photographers, local history societies, Sue Law enthusiastically brought me bits of scraps of paper, which is really really what it's all about. It was really only scraps of paper. And Chris with the photographs. I don't know, it's just lots of people. A lot of people, before I decided to publish, they knew I was gathering, and they would say, when is the book coming out? And I think, oh, I'm not sure about a book. But they kept saying it in the street and so forth. So, you know, I really owe it to them to have kept encouraging me.
And then you chose, yes, I am going to create a book. We're going to print this. And so who was involved in those processes that you'd like to acknowledge?
Look, we had used the same printer for one other book, 421. So we went back to the same printer, and they are fantastic. They're just lovely. And they have got this on their sample shelf for when people come in. They just told me this recently when I asked them if they still had the files. And they said, oh, yes, oh, well, and he pulled it off the shelf apparently. And I said, oh, you've got it next year. Oh, yes, he said, we keep that close to us because they were delighting in printing it. And I was delighted at the job they did, so that was good. They've printed another one of my books since then. Maybe I have had 3 that they've done, which I'm really happy with.
Okay. When you say Chris, you mean your graphic designer?
My son, Chris Erickson, my graphic designer. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. And I also notice you thank Melanie Dove.
Oh, Melanie Dove's the photographer, and I think I thank Banyule Council.
Yeah, for the grant, isn't it? You had your lovely grants officer.
That's right.
Was very,
it was serendipitous because I was ringing about something else which we didn't qualify for, but then I found I qualified for something, so that was great. I'm very happy.
Yeah.
And my granddaughter reminded me of what she wore when the night we got the cheque. So I had bought her a red fascinator, and she had worn it. So she reminded me of that the other day, which I so that's good. That's
lovely.
In her memory, yes.
That's lovely. That's important, the red fascinator. It'd be a symbol.
That's right.
Are there any other local residents you wanted to acknowledge or name at all, to thank for their
I just think everyone who stopped me in the street or rang me up or just rang and thanked me. I had someone email me a couple of weeks ago and had borrowed the book from the library. Eltham Library have some copies, and didn't realise it was out of print. And when I told him, well, it's been out of print, but you can have the first one off the press, he was absolutely delighted. And he had spent his childhood down on along Para Road, along the river, and he was 85 on Sunday. So that was nice.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. This has been such a pleasure to hear a bit about the background of the book. For me, reading it, there have been, as the second time round, reading it the second time round, there have been various paragraphs or photos of situations, people that have actually shown up in council recently or over the years that I've been involved. And what I've been doing... How
do you mean?
Lovett Industries, for example.
Oh, yes.
They've been around for
they're an institution.
Yeah, they are. They are an institution, yeah. And that history was really important to know as part of the conversations that were had in the background recently. It was earlier this year, actually. It was an item at council. The history of this was important to know in order to create specific arguments in this particular item of council. So it was a really significant piece of information. So while I was reading the book, I was going, oh my goodness, that happened then and that's happening now.
Gosh.
Oh, wow, some things don't change.
And I guess for myself, I don't know all that stuff that's going on out there, but we can only presume that it's all being churned around and maybe referred to, as you say. I mean, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's this is actually probably a more significant than I think you realise.
Maybe.
And I for one am really appreciative that you wrote it.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you for pressing me. Shall I put it that way?
That is my pleasure. That is my Sherborne Ward pleasure. And I'm glad you listened. I'm glad you listened to the community. I'm glad you've listened to me as well. It is a really important piece. So I'm glad that other people are going to be able to purchase this and read it and reread it and give it as gifts and share it and learn more about where they live. I'm just so excited. I'm really, really happy that you've done this. Now, something really important that we do also need to cover, I mentioned buying this, and this is a really good opportunity to let everybody in the community know that you have a lot of books at home that you really don't want to keep in your home. So,
good way of putting it. Turned one of the back bedrooms into a stock room, and I want to turn it back into a bedroom eventually.
Okay, yes. So in order to help you do that,
yes,
what I'd love for everyone to know, we are hoping that on Saturday, the 4th of September, in the shop, I think it's number 50 Weir Street, the lovely shop in Weir Street that's often used by a variety of our community, Maureen would like to hold a book launch. So essentially all day, most of the day on Saturday, the 4th of September, Maureen's holding a book launch. She will have all her copies of her books. The second edition of Montmorency Farm on the Plenty is available to buy for $50. And she will be there and she'll be able to sign the book for you if you would like. And if you would just like to come and buy the book, and you're welcome to pay cash or credit card, use a card. Yep. She'll take either, and perhaps ask some questions of her, learn a little bit more about her, the book. She might want to learn what you're going to use the book for. Are you going to keep it? Is it going to be a gift for somebody? Are you going to lend it out? She might want to hear that from you as well. So we would love for as many of you as possible to please share the message. Saturday, the 4th of September, in time for Father's Day on, I think it's Sunday the 12th of September. The idea is that it's a gift for Dad or an uncle or a grandfather. And we would love you to be there to buy the book and to hopefully have her sign it as well. Obviously, we're keeping an ear out for the restrictions. The plan is to go ahead that day. If it doesn't, I'll certainly keep you posted on my page and to let you know when we're actually going to go ahead with that book launch. But we'd love you to keep a bit of time aside on the Saturday the 4th to pop in and have your book signing. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Maureen, that maybe we've missed or we haven't asked about?
You've reminded me that the book has gone all over the world. It's gone to Canada and New York and London. That's the first round. Yes. So that takes people to get them there. So that is great news. It is going worldwide. It is going worldwide. So hopefully now being able to market this online, we will get more people maybe coming here sometime. And again, continuing that, continuing sharing the book worldwide. Good. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Alison. I don't have anything else to say.
Well, Alison and Maureen, I think we can agree that staying in touch, remembering our culture and history are very important components of strong communities. Maureen, all I can hope for is that what you've done with the book will inspire someone from the new generation to maybe take up some of those stories that you said have not been able to be told yet due to space in a book, and maybe follow your lead, bring them to light.
Yes, good.
Well, I think that would be great, actually, just to learn a little bit more about who we are and where we come from. Well, look, thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. That is all that we have time for. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Maureen. And thank you to everybody watching this podcast. And join us next time on the Champion Chat.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Have a nice weekend.